Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again. I'm Alicia Googins, but I love to be called Alicia, so I never correct anyone when they say that. Um, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone in the department, and also especially to Jonathan for organizing this and for the support. My presentation is entitled One Sign, Many Choices: Practical Applications of Jung's Theory of Synchronicity. So, as we begin, I do invite you to close your eyes for just a moment if that's something that's comfortable for you, or maybe to rest them on a still point. Um, as you do so, allow the rational mind to fall still and quiet. Remain open, if you will, to possibility, to intuition. And I invite you to imagine that you're held in the center of a vast, even infinite sentience, of which you are an integral part. As you move and think and imagine this sentience that is you, that the substance that you are in which you exist, also responds and moves and adjusts. You're an integral part of all that surrounds you. Your consciousness, which so often seems to be separate from your surroundings, is simply a focused part of a larger consciousness that sustains you and all that is. So, in this spirit, I invite you to consider with me the phenomenon of synchronicity explored by Carl Gustav Jung. So, if you'd care to open your eyes, I'll start just to speak a bit to the spirit of the inquiry that I began here. And it's really actually aligned with the upcoming conference in September entitled Forever Young, C.G. Jung's Continuing Relevance in Challenging Times. So, and I promise I was not remunerated in any way for mentioning that. I really hope to consider today a few things. One is how Jung's concept of synchronicity remains relevant today. How might we render it more accessible as a phenomenon to perhaps a wider audience? All kinds of ideas are out there, as we know about Jung. And third, how can we apply Jung's theory of synchronicity to our daily lives, as I believe Jung did himself, in a way that expands our consciousness, reinforces our connection with the sentient universe? So just to speak briefly to what synchronicity is, I'll share different definitions. All are Jung's words, and I appreciate them all for different reasons. But essentially, it's a meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than the probability of chance is involved. So often a psychic event corresponding with a physical event or physical confluence of events. And there's no cause. There's no cause in the way that we normally understand cause. So it's an acausal principle connecting two events. The events can even be distant in time and space, but they are yet accessible to our perception. And I appreciate the acausal principle definition. It makes clear that there's no identifiable cause in the traditional sense for the confluence. And then the last definition here really speaks to the effect that synchronicity has on our experience of the space-time continuum. And that's sort of one of the things I find most awe-inspiring about the phenomenon. So the theoretical underpinnings, I'll speak very briefly. One of the reasons that synchronistic experiences, when they occur, inspire such awe in us is likely that they have a quality of turning the laws of physics on their head. Jung notes that synchronicity designates the parallelism of time and meaning between psychic and psychophysical events, which scientific knowledge so far has been unable to reduce to a common principle. He also says the psyche cannot be localized when this happens in space, or space is relative to the psyche, another possible way of looking at it. And the same applies to the temporal determination of the psyche and the psychic relativity of time. So this phenomenon has massive implications for how humanity might conceive of the cosmos, including the functioning of space and time. And it was really part of a unifying theory that Jung developed over the course of his entire career, his professional life and personal life. It was his magnus opus, and it pointed to nothing short of an unus mundus, an ultimate unity of all existence, one world. So for this reason, Jung was famously quiet on the topic of synchronicity in his formal writings until quite late in his professional life. Synchronicity and A-Causal Connecting Principle, the title, was first published in 1952 when he was 77 years old, just 9 years before his death. He shared his work on this topic with a prominent physicist, Wolfgang Pauli, in a deliberate effort to position the weight of contemporary scientific thought behind his ideas as they reached the public. So I'll share a few examples. The example most often presented in the literature around synchronicity is that of a female patient of Jung's who was intractably rational, had no time for the unconscious, really wasn't making a lot of progress in sessions with Jung. And during a session with Jung, she was describing a dream she had had about a scarab, the green sort of beetle that appears here in my presentation. During the session, as she's describing the dream, just such a scarab beetle flew against the window of Jung's office. He opened the window, he caught the scarab and presented it to the woman, which spurred for her an enormous breakdown in her treatment based on the awe she felt at the powerful correspondence of her psychic event with this physical event. So there are other examples from Jung's life and work, but I want to take the time to share 2 examples of synchronicity that occurred recently in my own life, just to ground this exploration in my direct experience. The first example took place during a waking state and is an instance of what Jung described as events distant in space and time being perceptible to us. So on a recent Friday in April, in fact, it was Good Friday, I had a strong memory of the mother of a childhood friend of mine. This woman's name was Eve Grigg. She had been a second mother to me, caring for me as I spent hours at my friend Sarah's house, all while we were growing up, truly a second mother. I haven't spoken to Eve Grigg or seen her in years and years. Sarah and I are no longer in touch. And in this memory on Good Friday, my consciousness was filled with Eve Grigg. I remembered being 6 or 7, sleeping over at Sarah's house. I woke up scared in the night and I went in to crawl into bed with Sarah's parents. And I lay against Mrs. Grigg's back and I felt safe and I fell asleep again. So this memory on Good Friday was very, very vivid. I can picture the flowers on the sheets. Mrs. Grigg's nightgown was a long nightgown with ruffled edges. And as I held the image in my mind, I felt the warmth of her back as I slept against her. And a sentence came into my consciousness as though someone else were speaking it that said, "One day, Mrs. Grigg will die." 2 days later, on Sunday, my parents called to tell me that Mrs. Grigg had passed away in California 2 days earlier on Good Friday, the same day she had appeared so strongly in my consciousness. So we shared memories of her. And then in a sort of icing on the cake moment, later that afternoon that I had found out about her death, we have someone who comes and helps with the garden. And she came for the first time this season, our gardener, and cleared out some of the brush. And she always wears a tank top and jeans. And I went out to chat with her on that day, and she had a baseball cap on that I've never seen her wear. And the baseball cap said Grigg's Farm, spelled just like Mrs. Grigg. So this is the kind of event that occurs sometimes that seems so striking and so unusual. And that's an example of a synchronicity. The second example I'll provide comes from an intentional process of active imagination that I was engaged in while falling asleep one evening. And I call this the archivist. That's what it occurred to me to call it. So recently I was actually experiencing some doubt around during a process of intentional active imagination before falling asleep. I asked for guidance, and a figure appeared in my mind, whom I'll call the archivist. I saw her, a woman, sitting at the kitchen table in my home. She was in early elderhood. She was wearing glasses, neatly coiffed hair just above her shoulders, and she was looking down intently at work laid out before her on the table. And in this vision, I was aware that this figure was safeguarding and continuing the written work I had undertaken. She would not let nothing be lost. No work would be in vain. She was a witness to my work and creative output. And I had this feeling that I could move forward in the knowledge that my efforts were worthwhile and cared for. Just days later, I attended a party in the cafeteria of my son's middle school to celebrate his spring musical. Preteens were dancing and eating cake and pizza. And I looked around, and in the corner of the room, I feel like I have to swear on 10,000 Bibles, this is a true story. There was a woman sitting alone at a round table, just like my kitchen table, in the corner of this cafeteria at a middle school. She looked to be in her late 60s or 70s. She had glasses, hair styled neatly above her shoulders. She was working intently on her laptop in front of her. I looked around the room to see if anyone had noticed her. Her appearance was so incongruous. No one was with her. She was of a totally different age than everyone there. And there she was, a near exact physical manifestation of the archivist I had seen so clearly during waking sleep in my mind just days before. So the synchronicity was so striking to me, and it caused the astonishment that Jung describes when he speaks of it. So it, for me, functioned as an affirmation of the path I've chosen for my work and my writing. And it helped me resolve to ignore future doubts about my professional and creative work. So I'll give a couple of other examples later as we go through, but I'll move on to think about some of the possibilities that I see inherent in becoming more aware of this phenomenon. So what is possible through attention to synchronicity? Well, Jungian scholar Richard Tarnas, who's the keynote speaker actually at the conference, again, just another buy your ticket today, speaks compellingly about the effect that synchronicity can have on the human psyche. He says the dramatic coincidence of meaning between an inner state and a simultaneous external event seems to bring forth a healing movement towards psychological wholeness, mediated by the experience, by the unexpected integration of inner and outer realities. And interestingly, this aligns with the findings of a 2023 research study that was conducted at the University of Haifa and Akva College in tandem in Israel. And they developed a synchronicity awareness meaning detection scale. And they found first that synchronicity awareness mediated the relationship between the search for meaning and meaning detecting. Also, optimism and the presence of meaning in the life partly mediated the relationship between meaning detecting and life satisfaction. So in other words, increased awareness of synchronicity can indeed have a positive effect on life satisfaction and well-being. So that's what I want to explore in a little more detail next. I've become very interested in getting even more specific than Tarnas and some of the other scholars do on how we might increase our awareness of synchronicity. So what is possible? Re-enchantment, I feel, is possible through the attention that we can pay to synchronicity. It can re-enchant our world, and I'll speak a little more to that in a moment. It can really strongly reconnect us with nature, as well with our intuition, our instincts. It can reconnect and strengthen intuition, I feel. I'll say that I invite you all to approach my comments as grounded in my own experience, and to use that in the way that maybe Daniel Lippe suggests Indigenous knowledge systems do, which is to have the experiential knowledge be, in fact, a reliable source of true knowledge. Affirming the path, as mentioned, affirming maybe a career path or a personal life path can be enhanced through attention to synchronicity. An opportunity for informed choice, as in divination practices. And finally, in the construction or the reconstruction of personal myth. So I'll just touch on each of these and then explore how we actually implement the practices of these things. I'd like to bring in another voice. Jung, of course, says enchantment is the oldest form of medicine, which I love. There's a wonderful author, Catherine May, who wrote a book called Enchantment, Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age. And she describes enchantment as small wonder magnified through meaning, small doses of awe, almost homeopathic, the quiet traces of fascination that are found only when we look for them. It is the sense that we are joined together in one continuous thread of existence with the elements constituting this earth, that there is a potency trapped in this interconnection. And it's true in my experience that synchronicity can bring wonder and enchantment back to our lives. It can reinstate our childhood sense of the world as a magical place. It can offer comfort. And all this requires, in my experience, is an effort to combine awareness with imagination, to take a childlike view of the world by remaining open to other ways of knowing and interpreting what we perceive, in the way that my son Finian used to call out from the back of the car, "The moon is following us," as he would look out the window on nighttime drives. And it occurs to me, why would the new moon not be following us? And it is always. Um, so, and I mean, every enchant, not only in terms of awakening wonder, but also in terms of pointing out to us ways in which phenomena we see that might previously have appeared miraculous are in fact occurring everywhere, often around us all the time. Jung's theory, in its broadest sense, posits that the universe has an underlying order that expresses itself in archetypal images and forms that we can listen and respond to. From this point of view, as Jung puts it, we are obliged to view the miraculous in a somewhat different light. Reconnecting with nature. Synchronistic occurrences often manifest through the natural world. They offer us a way to reconnect with nature and regain a sense of ourselves as being part of something larger. Remaining open to synchronicities that might appear by way of birds, animals, the natural landscape, allows for observation and connection with nature. Something that Jung felt strongly had truly been lost and was the basis for much of the mental and spiritual illness in Western society. He speaks to the significance of connecting with the ocean in a letter to his wife, Emma. The beauty and grandeur of the sea consists in our being forced down into the fruitful bottomlands of our own psyches, where we confront and create ourselves. Similarly, in a letter to a friend, he suggests reconnecting with nature. You must go in quest of yourself. You will find again yourself only in the simple and forgotten things. Why not go into the forest for a time, literally? Sometimes a tree tells you more than can be read in books. Okay, let me speak a little to recovering a connection with our instinct and intuition. Jung said civilized man is in danger of losing all contact with the world of instinct, a danger that is further increased by his living an urban existence in what seems to be a purely man-made environment. This loss of instinct is largely responsible for the pathological condition of contemporary culture. And I have found that attention to synchronicity, awareness of it, faith in it, can help with reconnecting me to my own intuition. The experience of Mrs. Gregg's death and the synchronicity there is a strong example of an instinct filling my consciousness that something had happened. And Murray Stein, in his book, Jung's Map of the Soul, notes that deep intuition can provide knowledge that is indeed really true and not just speculation, guesswork, or fantasy, as indeed it turned out to be with Mrs. Gregg for me. Affirmation of the path I've spoken to a bit. There's, with the archivist, there's a moment that Tarnas relates from Jung's life in which he and a colleague were discussing whether or not to publish a book written by a friend. Just to paraphrase, Jung had decided not to publish the book, but just after the discussion is ended, he looked at his watch. His watch had stopped, even though he had just had it fixed. And there was an error on the time of his watch. So this occurrence in the physical world prompted him to feel that there had actually been a stoppage and an error in his own thinking. And he said to his colleague, let us take this conversation again and reconsider it. There has been an error in my thinking. And they had another conversation and decided in the end to publish the book. So an example of Jung putting this into practice. I'll mention also that a different study, this one was 2002, demonstrated a positive correlation between awareness of synchronicity and clarity on career pathways, actually, concluding that therapeutic techniques common to Jungian analysis, such as meditation, guided imagery, active imagination, and dream analysis, can provide a rich environment that may stimulate recognition of coincidences as indicators of significant career directions. So I offer that in thinking about.
Sorry, I forgot to give you the 18-minute. We're coming up on 20, but
Oh, no. Okay.
So,
Okay.
cheers.
Thank you.
For sure.
Um, so there are many, many examples of how informed choice can um, manifest in synchronicities. And maybe I'll just speak a little bit about co-creating our own myth. Jung had different moments in his life, in his own life and with his patients, where um, uh, he encouraged or he lamented the loss of personal mythology and encouraged the construction of it for himself and others. And I'll just speak a little bit as I go forward about how I feel synchronicity awareness can contribute to this. So all in all, I find that the practice of synchronicity awareness can really be a type of spiritual sustenance. It can give us a sense that we're embedded in a larger ground of meaning and purpose. How do we go about this? And I've not left enough time, but I believe first that cultivating a restful state of mind with open awareness, not taking the bait when the ego tries to get you to worry about the future or the past, these things can really help as we fall more quiet in our mind and practice synchronicity awareness. Connecting with the senses to observe the world around us, I find really helps. That the connecting with the senses is in fact the most direct way to come into the present moment. So if in fact there is a relativity of space and time in the present moment, to me that might explain how a psychic and a physical event could in fact have a confluence. Tarnas reminds us that a disciplined alertness to significant pattern, paying attention, can help us live a more conscious life. Um, Acting as if, let the universe be sentient in your imagination. Don't close off the possibility and allow for reenchantment. Set an intentional intention to let your life become magical again, as you were when you were a child. Actively asking for guidance can call forth synchronicities. Strengthening your knowledge of symbols and archetypes, staying open to intuitive flashes of insight as to their meanings. And then finally, using synchronicities to construct or strengthen your own myth. All of these things I feel can come together to form an intentional spiritual practice. And I've been working with this in my own life, and it's been clarifying and exciting and beautiful and very, very affirming. I was really interested in this paper, and I'll wrap up, Jonathan, on where there might be peer-reviewed studies going on that look into synchronicity, and there are some. It's very fascinating. It's seems to be somewhat early days in terms of population size for studies. Nothing huge, but this is also from the study conducted in Israel, but the results of this model suggest that individuals who search for meaning and are open to synchronicity events and manage to make sense of them may experience indeed more meaning and optimism, which eventually may contribute to greater life satisfaction. This is complicated, but it says, yes, this happens. So what's really going on? Maybe there's an order behind the cosmos, a dynamic force operating. A full account of reality must include the presence of the human psyche, we as the observer, as a participant, and the element of meaning. I love that quote from Murray's time. So I invite you to think more about this. I wish I had more time. I do find synchronicity brings a wonderful sense of connection, that the universe is listening and responding. What can we do in return? We can listen more intently and respond to it, live in harmony, be more aligned, live in a more connected way, causally and acausally. And I'll end with another quote from the Haifa study that says, this mindset, applying these pathways of synchronicity awareness in therapeutic, organizational, educational interventions can enhance well-being. Such a mindset may support individuals. And I love this quote because the language is typical of peer-reviewed journals, and yet it's addressing this numinosity adjacent topic. And I think Jung would be so happy that the two are really aligning, that science and spirituality are aligning. So I'll stop there and just say thank you all so much for your time and your attention today.
into the
Okay,
end.
I have just a couple of things that I'd like to share. Not really questions, Alicia. There's a preparing for the Red Book course that I'm teaching with Helge in the fall, and I was reading through the initial section of the Red Book and came upon this quote where Jung says, "I had to recognize that I'm only the expression and symbol of the soul. In the sense of the spirit of the depths, I am as I am in this visible world, a symbol of my soul." And the sense of this to me is that we're inside it. It's not inside us. We get it backwards because of the ego, the way the ego just kind of inflates to these huge dimensions and thinks that everything is inside it. Behind everything, there are gods, behind everything. And the universe does, in my estimation, make sense. I just can't decipher it very well. But when I'm in a particular frame of mind or presence, then things seem to hold together in really remarkable ways. And synchronicities just seem to be actually the order of existence. I wanted to share two more things. One is something that came in my YouTube actually yesterday morning, and this is a quote from Walt Whitman: "If you want to know where your heart is, watch where your mind goes when you daydream." And that for some reason that was coming up while you were speaking. That there's a real connection there, because I think that we live too much here. This is busy, busy, busy. And the last thing that I'll say is that there's a Hasidic saying, "There is an angel hovering above every blade of grass." And that's along the same lines. That the meaning that we seek is archetypal, which means that it has an intelligence. It's not just meaning in a kind of an intellectual sense. It's the deeper awareness that everything hangs together and is speaking to us at all times. So anyway, thank you so much, Alicia.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful note.
Jonathan, where do we go next? Who do we turn to?
So let's have Alex present.
Wonderful. Hi, Alex. And thank you, Alicia.
All right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. It is an exercise in flexibility. Thanks everybody for being here. Before I even get going on my slides, I would just maybe to fill the time while I'm getting my slide up there. I'd love to just kind of check in with folks and bring us all into this topic with a quick word association practice. Hang on a second. Sorry, now I'm getting a little tech happening over here. Very strange. Sorry about that. Word association. If I could get everybody to just be ready to type into the chat and tell me just one word or a very short phrase, the first thing that pops into your mind when I say the word menopause. I'm just going to read some of this out. So thank you. We got people participating what they think of when they hear the word menopause: age, ugh, older, transition, hot flashes, another ugh, ending, yeah, heat waves, memory issues. Thank you. Yeah. So there's some themes that are happening there, and that's gonna be weaved into what I'm talking about today. I appreciate too that people, just to notice that something comes up, right? We have some feelings about menopause. There's something there. The other thing that I want to say before I really get going here is just to check in about language and gender and inclusivity. I am going to be talking about menopause today, which is a physical transition that everyone who has ovaries will go through, usually at midlife, but not always, regardless of how they identify, how their gender identity. I'm also going to be talking about psychospiritual transformation, which may have more resonance for folks that identify as women, not necessarily connected to biology or physical experience. So because of that, I will probably tend to use women as a term throughout this presentation. And I just want to make it clear that this is an invitation to folks who feel resonance with this material. And so my intention here is to be welcoming to anyone who feels a connection to this, and also to note that it will not be all inclusive, right? It would be impossible for me to touch on what a midlife transition looks like for everyone, what the transition of menopause looks like for everyone, to include people that may not experience the physical transition of menopause. So take from this what feels relevant for you. I'm also open to conversation around that as we go through. Just want to make that clear from the start. So now, let me just get to the burning question that's on everyone's mind. What are middle-aged white ladies talking about on Facebook? Here's a peek into what happens on my feed. This is a hot topic right now, so I'll just note my friend here says, things I am currently into: weightlifting, red light therapy, magnesium, HRT, Oura Ring, and retinol. This is very common in the spaces that I'm in right now, both in my personal space and in my professional space as a therapist. Folks are talking about menopause, and there tends to be this flavor of, what do we do about this physically? Hey, I'm worried that we're aging. How do we put a stop to that? Or how do we fix that? And when I engage with this, I have some mixed feelings about it. I love seeing that people are talking about this. And I also have a little resistance to, like, oh, okay, well, is this what it's all about? So let me back up and just check in about what is menopause. What are we talking about when we talk about menopause? It is a physical change. In a way, it is very simple. Menopause happens when a person has their final menstrual period. That's it. And we also use this word to talk about a time of life and a set of physical symptoms that are not quite so simple. So we'll say that menopause happens at the final menstrual period, but because part of this is that that's sort of confusing, you don't know when is the last one. It's actually a year later that we finally call the race and say, okay, now a person is in menopause. There's another term that has become a little bit more common these days is perimenopause, which you can see from this graph here is a longer time period. Perimenopause refers to this time period when our bodies are changing, sort of getting ready for that time that menstruation starts. And this is when we see those symptoms that folks usually associate with this time. So hot flashes, brain fog, night sweats, migraines. I have a list here that we're going to go into even more deeply. But that's the time period that this is happening. When I talk about the menopause transition, it's really looking at this time of life as we start to recognize that there are some symptoms happening in our bodies. Oh, something's happening. I'm noticing that I'm changing, and maybe this is a moment of time where I'm transitioning into a different phase of life. A note here at the bottom, just a little bit of the science around this. What's really happening is that we're in ovarian failure. Ovaries are no longer producing eggs, and that means a dramatic drop in estrogen, which leads to a lot of symptoms. There's a ton of words on this slide, and that is intentional. I want you to feel a little overwhelmed by this because there's a handful of symptoms that we associate with this physical transition. Actually, there are a lot of physical changes that happen at this time, and people want relief. We're talking everything from alcohol tolerance changes, asthma, brain fog, fatigue, dizzy spells, itchy skin, mood changes, wrinkles, weight gain, sleep apnea, full spectrum here. So there's a reason that people are talking about the physical symptoms and how do we fix that. In addition, people are ready to spend a ton of money on this. The menopause market size is predicted to hit almost $28 billion by 2033. In 2024, almost $18 billion was spent in this market. Yes, that is a picture of Gwyneth Paltrow. That's how she chose to mark her 50th birthday, painting herself gold. Maybe a symbol of this market, where people want relief, they're willing to spend money. Product makers are responding to that. And this is complex. I feel like this is a place where we get drawn in this direction of how do we throw money at this problem? How do I get better? And there's value in that. Of course, people are hurting and they want to feel relief, but I feel like getting caught up in that space takes us away from another aspect of this time of transition. So yes, menopause is a physical change, but can it be more than that? Can this time of, fiery alarm bells going off be a call to paying attention to our psycho-spiritual development at this midlife phase? And here I want to just call Carl Jung into the discussion, his concept of individuation. Carl Jung was really the first of our psychological lifespan theorists. He was the first person to put out there this idea that we are developing throughout our entire lives, not just in the space of childhood, adolescent, become an adult when you're 20, and then you're done, right? We continue to develop throughout our whole lives. In his formulation, the beginning of life, or the first half of life, is really concerned with ego development and adaptation, self-reliance. We're figuring out how to read the world and how to survive in it and how to fit into it, and what we need to do to create the sort of, the persona, the picture of ourselves that we put out into the world. In the second half of life, Jung recognizes there's an invitation for a different kind of development. The second half of life can be about making the unconscious conscious. And this is really the heart of individuation, the space of stepping into our wholeness, recognizing all of the parts of ourselves. There's a quote here from James Hollis. He describes this as the surrender of the ego's agenda of security and emotional reinforcement in favor of humbling service to the soul's intent. So there's something there it's a really beautiful invitation to something larger. And it's also a time of grief and loss, being willing to let go of what we have been and stepping into something different. And I think that this is part of what's happening in these conversations around menopause. There's a fear of letting go of what we have been, especially in our Western consciousness, where youth and beauty are what matter, right? What happens if I have to let go of all that I have created in myself in this first half of life and become something different? Jung said exactly one thing in his writings about menopause. This is the one place in his collected works where the word menopause arrives. He says, "It is a great mistake to suppose that the meaning of life is exhausted with the period of youth and expansion. That, for example, a woman who has passed the menopause is finished. The afternoon of life is just as full of meaning as the morning, only its meaning and purpose are different." I love that some folks today mentioned this in the chat, right? This idea of being finished or an ending. And here Jung is to say, oh no, this is not the end. This is just a passage into a different space. Some of you may recognize this as a callback to a meme that was going around earlier this year comparing George Costanza at 30 to Timothy Chalamet at 30. Just the implication being that 30 ain't what it used to be. The reason that I'm calling it in here is because there were so many things that Carl Jung said 100 years ago that are so relevant today. He could see the future, right? He could anticipate where we were going. And yet at the same time, I'm not sure that he fully anticipated the type of cultural adolescence that we might find ourselves in today in 2025. And this is really why I'm tapping into this menopause energy as an initiation into individuation. In the last 30 years or so, a fair number of psychologists, psychotherapists, philosophers have been pointing to this puer aeternus, are clinging to eternal youth and kind of sounding the bell that it is time to grow up. Some selections here from Bill Plotkin, James Hollis, Malidoma Somé, and Anodia Judith. I'd mentioned Robert Bly also has a book called The Sibling Society. Folks that are naming this as an issue that we deal with culturally, our collective resistance to aging, our challenges in having meaningful representatives of elderhood and models for moving into elderhood. Bill Plotkin says, true adulthood is rooted in transpersonal experience, in a mystic affiliation with nature, experienced as a sacred calling that is then embodied in soul-infused work and mature responsibilities. These folks referenced here are also, in their different ways, have put forth prescriptions for how we might do that, how we might engage in our own process of maturity, really recognizing how we have neglected our responsibilities to each other and to our planet, and inviting folks to move forward into elderhood. So that brings us to Haggitude. And I would just offer a moment for you to check in with how you feel about that word. I have some mixed feelings about it. But one model that I wanted to share today in terms of moving forward in this transition, specifically related to menopause, specifically related to a feminine engagement with individuation at midlife. Sharon Blackie wrote a book very recently called Haggitude, Reimagining the Second Half of Life. In this book, she calls on the indigenous cosmologies of the British Isles, where she is from, and looks to nature-based spirituality and old women archetypes as inspiration and aspiration. So in this model, Blackie recognizes we, in our rejection of aging and our clinging to youth, we have kind of a dearth of stories and representatives of what we are moving toward. And so she digs back and looks at myths and fairy tales that can give us examples of what old women can look like and what we can be moving toward. She says the ways in which we think about aging depend on the stories we tell about it. How we think about aging women depends on the images we hold of them. And so in her formulation, she writes about the House of Elders, chapters on each of these old women archetypes: the creatrix, the woman who weaves the world, the protector of the land, which sort of evokes Joanna Macy, Jane Goodall, the fairy godmother, the woman who tells the stories to the young folks and gathers them in through her storytelling. The trickster, who is the truth teller, the brave old woman who will say what needs to be said, no matter the consequences, and the wise woman who offers her counsel. What I want to share just about this in this section is my own personal connection with this. I come to this work as someone who is not particularly myth or symbol oriented. It's a place where I have a growing edge and I want to learn more, but it's not something that resonates really strongly for me. And I created this work that we're going through today in a course on Jung's work. And so I'm looking for a connection there. All that to say, I was sort of approaching this work from an academic perspective. And then when I was reading these chapters, the creatrix in particular, but all of them had something to offer, I recognized a shift in myself. There was something that I could feel reading these stories about women creating, using their creative expression in this second half of life, making things, making the world, that felt really inspiring to me. I could feel it working, which has me further interested in this process and how I might engage with this in my own life and also offer it to clients going forward. that really brings us to the end here. And I just want to kind of put out here, maybe for your own reflection, maybe for conversation if we have time at the end today. What does it mean to embrace haggitude? Like I said, I have some mixed feelings about that. I can feel in myself that resistance to, oh, what does that mean if I'm moving toward being a hag? I want to fully embrace this evolution into older life, but then it's sort of like when the rubber meets the road, do I really want that? And then that question, do people want this? I recognize that in particular, this midlife transition, especially the physical experience of it, while it can be a place for us to wake up to what's going on, it can also be very overwhelming. And maybe at this time of life, what people have the resources to deal with is the physical experience, and the psychospiritual needs to wait for a later time. And then also looking at what supports are needed in making this shift. So I can see that both as kind of therapeutic support, whether that's working with a coach or a therapist in this space, or working in group work, other people who are moving through this transition who are concerned with psychospiritual transformation. But it also may be a cultural support, and how we change the way that we interact with this time of life and this transition. With that, I will close this talk on menopause and reconnecting to the sacred in this midlife space. And yeah, I'm not sure how we are on time, if there's room for questions in this moment, or if we want to put that to later. Again, I just really appreciate folks showing up for this and being willing to pay attention to this topic.
I want to say, Cindy, thank you so much. It was wonderful. You answered all my questions. I was feverishly writing questions down as you were speaking, and every one of them you answered. I do think that we're in some ways, the promotion of youth also promotes consumerism, unending consumerism, and that's a real problem that we face. And I don't know how to escape it, because money, capitalism, consumerism are really seductive. It's very difficult, because if you choose to not participate in it, the person, living next door to you will. And, the lack of money can also mean lack of resources. So this is a really difficult question. But when you look at it from an unsold perspective, there are 4 seasons, more or less. In the West Coast, there are 4 seasons every day, but there is autumn and there's winter. And it makes perfect sense, not just metaphorically, but it makes perfect sense that we arise like a flower, as Jung says. It's the rhizome that's the reality. The flower arises, it lives for its day, and then it diminishes and goes. And it's strange that in a world where religion is so dominant, that people don't have trust. They seem not to trust that there's something beyond this, and so we hold on to it as tightly as we can. So thank you for this.
Yes, and I think that is something that we collectively have a resistance to aging, and it feels ever more prominent in female bodies, that rejection of what that second half of life looks like. And I think a lot of us internalize that as well, this idea that things are done when I'm 50 or 55. And really, if we stick with this menopause transition, it typically happens around 50. And at our current life expectancy, you got about half of your life left, right? So what does that mean to really honor that and recognize that there's still so much to do and so much to love about that part of life?
There's a place in Jung's writing, a few places, but I'm thinking of a short talk that he gave that's collected in C.G. Jung Speaking. I think it was at the Harvard Tercentenary Club or something, where he gave a talk on Jesus. And he said that Jesus was granted the resurrection body because he lived his life right through his death. Now, of course, Jesus died young, but for Jung, this is the task, is to live our lives right through our deaths. because then we might be granted the resurrection body. And I think that you see that in his life, in the way that he lived into his dying, which is
Mhm.
something that everybody who's interested in this topic should look at.
Mhm. Yeah. Mary.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for bringing the topic up. I did read Haggitude, and I agree that um, it definitely had a shift in how I viewed the transition, and I kind of looked at it as an opportunity as opposed to an ending, as it was an opportunity for the next section of my life. And I think as more and more people get older, and we have this new state of information that's flowing as quickly as it does, I'm hoping that it brings that to more people as again an opportunity for another section, another part of your life that it just really opened it up for me. So I appreciate you bringing up this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And thanks for just kind of seconding that on Haggitude.
Yeah.
Paige?
Good morning, everyone. Cindy, thank you so much. I'm thrilled. I dialed in to see your presentation, and it was really compelling, and I'm grateful for some of these tools. I hadn't heard of Haggitude, and for me, that fits with my kind of ethnic background, although it's a little edgy. But I love the invitation to move into the sacred with nature, and also find just engaging with EWP that sort of this scholar archetype feels more timeless to me as a woman, in midlife, trying to thrive and in structures of patriarchy and capitalism. It really feels like the systems are putting that pressure on us to be young and pretty. And so, yeah, that was very thought provoking, and I'm excited to have some books to read on the topic and your scholarship as well as other scholars. So thank you for this important topic. Really appreciated it.
Gosh, thank you, Paige. Thank you for bringing in that additional archetype, right? The scholar in our later age. I really appreciate that contribution. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, Kathy?
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy and everybody. And I just want to bring in another archetype from the British Isles that arrived in my hands yesterday, Sheila the Gig. So she's blessing your work, everyone.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
And it ties in with the synchronicity that Alicia spoke so eloquently about. Thank you, Alicia.
Yes, yes.
All right. My presentation is called Circles of Practice, Approaching Meditation as a Person with Bipolar. Sorry, I'm just trying to say, okay, so my keyboard buttons are going to work. Okay. That's how I'm going to switch slides. All right. My practice is circular, just like my mind. I meditate constantly, my concentration ebbing and flowing. One day I am too agitated to sit still. The next day I get so deeply absorbed that I dissociate. I might passionately keep up the practice for a few days, and then lose the habit for several more days, feeling shame that makes it harder for me to return. Then there are days when my bipolar disorder, a cyclical condition, requires me to walk gently on unbroken golden eggshells to avoid the sunny liquid breaking free. If an egg does break, the brilliant yolk, the vigorous yang energy, is hard to contain. I face the same challenges as many other people in meditation, and yet some challenges are distinctly my own. How does a person with bipolar disorder or other mental health or neurodivergent conditions approach meditation? There are unique dangers and gifts for those who know the darkness and the light. In some ways, you might be more vulnerable to unexpected effects of meditation. But in other ways, the resilience we have developed in struggling with our mental health may give us tools for facing the spiritual unknown. Michael Stone is an example of a renowned Buddhist teacher in the West who unfortunately succumbed to bipolar after debating for some time with himself whether or not to reveal his diagnosis and thus show vulnerability to his followers. Clearly, meditation is not a panacea for good mental health. On the contrary, meditation can have adverse effects as well, even for people without a pre-existing mental health condition. Yet there is hope for us when we carefully balance the needs of mental stability with spiritual wisdom. Then perhaps the ultimate cycle of samsara will be broken. I remember one of my earliest bipolar episodes, which happened in 2020, in the middle of a student strike at my college. The day after, I had a massive breakdown over a social mistake that I and a few other student activists had made. I was supposed to have a piano lesson through Zoom. After explaining to my teacher what happened the previous day, he decided to lead me in a meditation instead, on surrendering to the divine. With every instruction he gave, it felt like I was letting go more and more of myself, until I came to a point when I felt like I was going to transcend. Then he told me to open my eyes and make small movements of my body to end the session, but I could not move. My eyes could not open, my body was transfixed, and even my breath seemed to have disappeared. After a few seconds of this, I suddenly broke open and fell into convulsive laughter. My teacher was able to calm me down by playing something soothing on his piano. However, he had no words for what had just happened to me. The secularization of meditative practices leads to the danger of people experiencing intense phenomena that they do not have the conceptual frameworks to explain. Katrina Michelle writes about one woman she saw in her psychotherapy private practice, who experienced what was labeled as mania due to university coursework on spiritual psychology that failed to prepare for the possibility of intense responses to spiritual stimulation. After her crisis was reframed as a spiritual emergency, she was able to connect with resources for further support and did not have any recurrence of bipolar-like episodes in the following 5 years. Brant Courtwright also recognizes that spiritual emergency often happens due to a lack of conceptual framework to understand an intense experience. Yet he also mentions the possibility that a person may not have the physical and emotional resilience needed to integrate the experiences into the self. In the first case, spiritual psychoeducation and supportive measures may suffice to help a person to integrate their experience, but in the second case, more drastic measures may be required, including extensive therapy, medications, or even hospitalization. Without any support, people in both scenarios can fail to integrate their spiritual experiences and may break down and never recover, or especially if they receive a psychiatric diagnosis and are medicated for it, find their spiritual emergency cut short before it could transform them. It was because of what happened those few days that I was initially encouraged to go see a psychiatrist. But I insisted that it was not a psychiatric problem, rather a spiritual awakening. In hindsight, given my continued instability that has led me to be hospitalized 5 times over the years, it was probably both. 2 months after that incident, a lengthy depressive episode forced me to seek psychiatric treatment so I could continue my undergraduate studies. Later that academic year, I was psychiatrically hospitalized for the first time and thus was thoroughly thrust into the world of conventional clinical treatment. But my spiritual awakening was never fully addressed. Still, I must count myself lucky for already having a concept of spiritual awakening that I could use to understand my experiences, as well as a thoroughly non-stigmatizing perspective on mental illness. Without these non-stigmatizing conceptual frameworks, I might have had a worse outcome. Given that our mental health system does not offer adequate spiritual care, my task now is to seek spiritual growth myself. In the landmark Varieties of Contemplative Experience study by Lindahl et al., 59 different types of adverse effects of meditation experienced by Western Buddhists were documented. Examples of potentially adverse effects included perceptual hypersensitivity, physical pain, change in self-other or self-world boundaries, and affective lability. The researchers found that there were 7 broad categories of adverse experiences: cognitive, perceptual, affective, somatic, cognitive, sense of self, and social. I've had experiences that fall under all of these categories, although I do not necessarily experience them as negative, just something potentially difficult to deal with. Participants in the study often experienced multiple adverse effects at a time. A different study by by Hansen et al., investigated adverse effects of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or MBCT, for people with bipolar disorder. Participants were randomly assigned to either MBCT combined with treatment as usual or just treatment as usual. 22 out of 58 participants were found to have experienced adverse effects from MBCT. The number of participants reporting adverse effects decreased over the period of the study, as well as the number of adverse effects reported per participant each week. Although more than half of participants experienced the adverse effects as initially negative and challenging, most of them found that their challenging experiences helped them to strengthen their coping skills. I find this promising for people with bipolar. Even if we experience adverse effects, they are not necessarily permanent and they can assist in psychological growth. However, as Miguel Farias and Catherine Wilkins state, not all difficult experiences associated with spiritual practices are necessarily spiritual. A psychotherapist or expert spiritual teacher may have the power to help turn a difficult experience into a meaningful one, but not always. End quote. These adverse events also do not necessarily go away with the advancement of one's practice, despite the decrease of adverse effects over time that Hansen et al. Found. David Shapiro's study of 27 meditators with different amounts of meditation experience found that more experienced meditators actually had more adverse effects than the less experienced. This may be evidence that advanced types of meditation pose greater psychological and somatic risks than more fundamental exercises like mindfulness or focusing on the breath. I found that to be true in my own experience, which is why I usually focus on the breath when other objects of focus begin to agitate me. Sometimes I meditate so deeply that it feels like I am dissociating. It then becomes hard for me to speak or even to move properly. I retreat inward and sometimes notice my breath disappearing. Such a state often does not take long to arise. Just a few minutes of meditation might lead me to withdraw too intensely. Sometimes mania or other emotional instability can make these experiences more likely, but sometimes they occur without warning. So even though some might say that they are signs of advanced practice, I am both curious and scared about my experiences. Perhaps if I had a close mentor who knew how to guide someone both in and out of such intense inward-looking states, I could risk going deeper to a place that I might need help returning from. But I do not have such a teacher, so in order to protect my daily functioning, I need to set some boundaries in my practice for now. I can dissociate, but I need to make sure that I can return to baseline. If things feel scary, I trust my gut. If I need to stop dissociating, I open my eyes and move whatever parts of my body that I can as soon as possible. Even though adverse effects of meditation are still a new topic of inquiry in Western science, ancient and medieval texts in Buddhism and Taoism already spoke of potential adverse events relating to meditation. According to Pierce Salguero, the Buddha listed 50 demonic states that can entrap meditators. Some of these relate to doctrines, such as believing that death is final, or that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can be female, but others align with some of the phenomena cataloged in the Varieties of Contemplative Experience study. Some Buddhist texts also listed potential somatic illnesses arising from meditation. Additionally, Salguero references a sutra that tells a cautionary tale about a group of monks who, under the Buddha's instruction, practiced meditating on the impurity of the body and then started to attempt suicide. The Buddha's instruction to these distressed monks was to return to the meditation on the breath. Thus, the antidote to what early practitioners called meditation sickness may not necessarily be to cease meditating, as many who experience adverse effects do, but rather to return to a more basic and less distressing object of concentration. Other methods of treating meditation sickness include contemplating a contrasting image, for example, imagining water when dealing with the heat of fire in the body or mind, and other peaceful visualizations. The Chinese author Zhi from the 6th century also recommended a number of remedies that are associated with Taoist practices, such as focusing on the dantian or practicing the 6 healing breaths. According to the Venerable Paula Chichester, in Tibetan Buddhism, the concept of Jung literally wind or air, is a form of meditation sickness arising from meditating too intensively and brings along symptoms that are similar to those identified in the varieties of contemplative experience study. Avoiding talking too much and eating heavy foods such as meat and whole grains can assist with recovering from lung. Chester also recommends that during a meditation retreat, one should treat oneself, quote, like you are convalescing from a long sickness, end quote. About a year ago, I tried taking yoga classes at a local studio. During multiple classes, I experienced temporary states of mania or depression that only lasted for the length of the yoga class, but were very intense. I believed that not that I was simply having a bipolar relapse, but rather that I was responding strongly to the spiritual activity and the sacredness of the yoga room. Still, the director instructed me not to return until I resolved this issue, saying that the teachers in the studio were not trauma-informed and thus did not know what to do with my experiences. A few months later, I tried taking Pilates classes instead, as I wanted to engage in physical exercise. Almost every class, I suffered an autistic shutdown in which I withdrew into myself, such that I could not stand or speak properly. Although the Pilates classes were not contemplative like the yoga classes were, the fact that I struggled in both types of classes might suggest I indeed carry some trauma relating to my body, or perhaps I'm already so aware of sensations in my body that activities that heighten that awareness are overwhelming. I eventually do want to return to somatic practices, but I'll need to take the time to become more even-keeled and to process what trauma I might be storing in my body. As David Treleaven says, direct, sustained contact with traumatic stimuli without adequate preparation locks survivors into a potentially debilitating loop. Mindfulness meditation can end up triggering traumatic symptoms that follow people into their lives, end quote. Trauma can include discrete distressing events that a person has experienced, such as a car accident or sexual assault, chronic stressors like a childhood of abuse or neglect, and societal factors such as racism and other forms of systemic oppression. Key to Treleaven's protocol for managing traumatic flashbacks during meditation is the usage of exteroception, or the 5 external senses of vision, hearing, smell, touch, and taste, to ground oneself in the present and counteract the distressing internal landscape that interoception, the perception of internal experiences such as emotions, temperature changes, and pain, overwhelms one with. Although I do not typically experience flashbacks, I use a sense of touch to ground me when I'm thrown into an intense state of mind or when my high-level interoception overwhelms me. Treleaven emphasizes the importance of meditation teachers recognizing the effects of trauma, getting to know students' trauma history and their current needs prior to meditation intensives, and checking on students who seem to become overwhelmed during meditation. At one point during this semester, I became intensely curious about Wiccan and pagan practices. I went down a rabbit hole of memorizing tarot card and rune meanings while feeling markedly depressed. I felt like nothing was of interest to me except this obsessional memorization task. Obsessing about these spiritual matters, as well as reading the entire Dao De Jing in English, eventually converted this mixed mood state into euphoric mania. When I realized I had become manic, I tried my best to avoid further spiritual stimulation, including meditation and engagement with music activities. Still, it took a few days to settle down, during which I occasionally fell into trances that perhaps resembled a deep meditative state. I want to note that although mania is usually characterized by rapid speech and movement, trance-like states in which everything slows down and I feel colloquially zenned out are also common for me. I try to avoid thinking about my emotional intensity as mood episodes, as the diagnosis of mood episodes carries a connotation of a longer-term issue, whereas my emotional roller coaster went by fairly quickly with some assistance from medication. Meditation practices, as a form of spirituality, can have the negative effect of spiritual bypassing, in which a person overlooks their psychological problems by reframing their problematic thoughts and behaviors through a spiritual lens. Spiritual bypassing might come in the form of not allowing oneself to feel anger and prematurely forcing oneself to forgive a person who has hurt them, making the excuse that one is practicing nonviolence or compassion. In these two examples, one forgets to have compassion for oneself, which requires them to accept the human reality of having emotions. Another example is when a person avoids accountability for their mistakes by simply stating that they are learning or on a spiritual journey. As Brant Cortright emphasizes, balancing spiritual progression with psychological growth is important, as they do not necessarily follow one after the other. I cannot justify encouraging a manic state, which often is intensely spiritual for me, by claiming that I am in a more subtle state of consciousness, as mania can be damaging for both others and me, and may be related to unresolved psychological issues. I must find a way to connect with spirituality and the concept of non-self, while also protecting my mental health and healing the self. Grounding forms of meditation can help me to reduce overwhelm and prevent autistic shutdowns. After a long day of rehearsal for a youth choir that I accompany, I was exhausted and worried that I would not have enough energy for the concert at the end of the day. So I requested the choir room to be in just prior to the concert. I sat on the couch and practiced mindfulness meditation, choosing not to concentrate on anything in particular, but rather to just quietly exist in my mind and in the physical space. This practice, which probably was closest to objectless Zheng meditation, reinvigorated me, and I was able to perform in the concert with more attention and energy than I otherwise could have. Given the benefits that meditation could give me, I do wonder sometimes if I'm letting fear get in my way. What if the emotional intensity I feel in meditation is actually healthy, or at least something neutral, and my fear arises more from the past experiences of pathologization of my feelings? What if I carry the trauma of not having been given the spiritual care that I needed when, in what I initially labeled a spiritual emergency, and instead was given medications and hospitalization, and encouraged to think about my experiences in a clinical way? I do not have a PTSD diagnosis, but I, like everyone, have experienced at least a mild form of trauma. Perhaps this trauma may be activated sometimes when I try to meditate. It differently comes out when I speak of spirituality. Sometimes I start sobbing over everything I've gone through and the spiritual hurt that I carry. My emotional intensity may actually be a call for me to go deeper and undergo the spiritual exploration that I was supposed to undergo several years ago. The journey must be gradual, and I must resist the temptation to dive in too deeply at once, but I shall trust the practice and be dogged in my efforts. I must remind myself of the Buddha's suggestion that the antidote to meditation sickness can often be more meditation, just with a more grounding focus. I have my mental health providers, my medications, to help catch me if I start to get lost, which means I can stay safe even if I feel scared. As Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche wrote, every mental affliction is actually the basis of wisdom. My practice is circular, just like my mind, and as I care for my bipolar sensitivity, I also tend to the clarity of my mind over and over, the clouds drifting away with the turnings of time. Yeah, thank you.
I just
You can
want,
do that. Thanks,
okay,
Martin.
I just want to say, Margin, this is, I mean, for me, this is a model of what we're attempting to do in East West. Your talk was intensely personal and also really scholarly. It was a really wonderful balance of both of them. I want to acknowledge that, and at the same time acknowledge that you're sharing something with people that is really places you in a vulnerable position. So I also wanted to acknowledge that and honor that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm wondering. I went to school with David Treleaven. He graduated from East West Psychology. I don't know if you know that about him. There's a book by a man named Lee Sanella, Sanella, I think it is. It's called Kundalini: Psychosis or Transcendence. It's available.
Wait, is it this? I got a book like it, like the books?
No. This is just, you can find this on the internet.
Okay.
It's available. The PDF is available. He wrote it in 1970, so probably a lot of the medical data is outdated, but he worked in a clinic in the 1960s when a lot of people were either exploring meditation without a grounding culturally, or taking psychoactive drugs like LSD. and having spontaneous Kundalini experiences and just not having having a container for them, not really understanding what it was they were going through. So this might be something that you would be interested in taking a
Yeah,
look at.
could you type the title or the author in the chat?
Yeah,
Again,
it's
take a
called
note.
Yeah, Martin, I just wanted to appreciate your presentation, especially because I think that you're talking about something where we have a our awareness that meditation can be challenging for folks, especially with trauma, is becoming more widespread. But you brought in the nuance of spiritual experience, of meditation sickness, the history around that, and I just think it's a space that's not it's not as widely explored right now. Like, you're stepping into a new space and bringing that with your personal experience was really powerful. So thank you.
And I'd like to mention that it was connected with my personal experience to find why this topic is important for me, and I came to conclusion that when I study different consciousness theories, I don't see something talking about body and how it's a body connected with environment. And that's why I came to enactivism. It's the next second slide. Next, please. Yes, this. And next, please. Next, please. Yes. Thank you. In activism, it was developed by the group of scientists like Francesca Varela, Thompson, and Roche, and they talk about how body exists and connected with environment, with culture, and create a special form of consciousness. So next, please. This particular idea of Francesco Varela, where he combined Buddhist philosophical idea of dependent origination and phenomenology and cognitive science, all these for me echo East-West psychology, because he connected Western and Eastern ideas and created something completely new that had still impact on study of artificial intelligence or post-human cognition and any other ideas. Next, please. And talking about embodied cognition, the main idea that we don't just think with our brains, we think with and through our bodies. Our gestures, postures, and gut reactions shape how we make sense of the world. In this case, cognitive science has historically treated thinking as something that happens in the brain. But embodied cognition says thinking happens with the body, through the body, and often beyond the body. For example, my hands helps me communicate with people and solve problems. Or my current stress level affects how I remember talking about this presentation. Next slide. In 2006, Sean Gallagher expanded this into the 4E model, representing cognition as something not just happening in the brain, but is distributed across brain, body, environment, and more. This model challenged the traditional brain in vet view of cognition, offering a holistic, dynamic, and social aware account of how we think and feel. So there's a four main elements: embodied, shaped by our body; embedded, shaped by our environment; enacted, shaped by our actions; extended, shaped by tools and technologies. Later, in 2010, Giovanni Colambetti added a fifth element, affective, shaped by our emotions and feelings. However, the 4EA model accounts for emotion actions. It still frames cognition mostly in terms of what can be tracked: visible behaviors, emotional responses, and how we interacted with our surroundings. What's left out is symbolic dynamics that shape meaning at deeper pre-verbal level. Next, please. I try to show how all these form of cognition connected with my experience as immigrant. For example, it's a yellow hat. As intersex, it's a purple hat. So, for example, when I talk about embodied cognition, it's so something connected with my body. As intersex, when I feel tension or speaking a second language right now, I feel discomfortable in my body because, and this is shaped how I communicated with you and with myself. And as intersex, embodied cognition be connected with me how I navigated body that resist binary norms. And is every this type of cognition connected through my body with environment around me. But again, all these types, they don't have space for symbolic, spiritual. So where we can find this? So next, please. So what gets left behind? Even with all these body, emotion, action, environment, something is left out. What about dream, myth, symbol? What about the spiritual? Not as belief, but as what the body knows before the mind speaks. And this turned to me two thinkers who deepened this conversation. Eric Goodwin and Robert Bosman. Next, please. Okay. While Jungian psychology has traditionally been associated with symbolic and interpretive approaches, a growing number of scholars like the Goodwin, Bosnak, and Mark Winborn are helping to situate its insight with contemporary frameworks like neuroscience, embodied cognition, and affective science. This trend may reflect a broader interest in integrating depth psychology with empirical research and lived embodied experience, responding to both cultural and academic calls for models that bridge inner meaning with observable process. To me, this also resonates with expanding missions of East-West psychology, by focusing on holistic ways of knowing that integrate psyche, body, culture, and consciousness. Next, please. Goodwin suggested that archetypes aren't just learned stories, they embodied biological metaphors built into our nervous system and DNA, what he calls the innate story code. Emotional expressions like feeling heavy when we grieving or heating up when we angry aren't just poetic. They reflect the body, how we thinking through our body. Dreams in this view are not just abstract symbols, but spontaneous embodied responses to emotional experience. This perspective aligns with Foy cognition, which sees meaning making as grounded in our body states, shaped by our environment, enacted through experience, extended through cultural tools, and deeply affected by emotion. Next, please. This is different quotes from Eric Goodwin, recent articles about spontaneous thoughts and archetypical images and how it can be connected with body and neuroscience. So next, please. Bosnak view, he created embodied imagination method. Invites people to re-enter dreams not as stories, but as emotional environments. Participants explore the felt experience of dream figures, animals, even special spaces through the body. Like Goodwin innate story code, this approach treats dreams as embodied, effective responses. It aligns with the folk cognition model, dreams as embodied in sensation, embedded in emotional context, enacted through engagement, and effective in nature, revealing the unconsciousness as something lived process. For me, I even asked here, Does Bosner create embodied imagination as a method of embodied cognitive unconsciousness, if we can say it like that? It's just my thinking. Next, please. So where does this leave us? While some areas of contemporary cognitive science are moving toward more embodied models, much of the field still relies on computational metaphors, so like cognition is computer, that leave little space for symbolic or the spiritual as real parts of cognition. But in doing that, it forgets that thinking is not just information, it's a lived meaning. So I ask again, could be unconsciousness be part of embodied cognition? Could dreams be cognitive? Maybe the unconsciousness, it's not just a mystery to be solved. Maybe it's a presence to be felt. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Finally.
Alex. It was worth the wait. Thank you so much. That was amazing. There was so much there. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. What I was left with at the end was what came to mind was you have the universe as a field of immanence, right? As a field of material existence, and then spirit as something that's supposedly transcendent. And where they meet in Jungian psychology is in the soul, in the psyche that unifies, that joins these two. But he never goes on to say what they are in their essence, because they transcend. The body transcends our ability to understand it through the psyche, and the spirit transcends our ability to transcend it through the psyche. So this, I mean, I'm thinking about all of these presentations today, and I won't go too deeply into this because I want people to be able to ask you questions. This was present for me, and in each one of them, this tension between what we experience materially and whether there's the ability to transcend that, whether there is something that we can say transcends that, or if you can't say that something transcends that. And like in extreme Advaita, it's the void. There's nothing there. There's nothing that can be said about it because it's nothing, but that's what you are originally. So I'm finding that all of the things that kind of came up in your talk are floating around in that soup for me. Where's the embodied imagination? It's embodied. Is it connected to spirit? Where does spirit live? Is there embodied spirit? Is there a separation, or is there no separation? Or do we make a mistake when we think in terms of a separation, the body-mind split? So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is like really off the subject, but these are the things that were coming up for me while you were speaking.
If you don't mind, I would like to edit. I guess I'm grateful to the universe that I became the last presenter, because it helps me to see how everything what we talk today, different presenters, we all are connected. We all talk about bodily experience in different ways, connected with spirituality. What we do at East West Psychology program at California Institute of Integral Studies, we do very unique knowledge. We build bridges. We connected different type of knowledge of consciousness, embodiment, personal experience, depth psychology, cognitive science, something completely different, but the same, very important, especially now time. And I just listened different presentations before me. I think, oh my God, they talk about the same that I'm going to talk. I'm talking from more cognitive science. They talk more from depth psychology, or they talk more from life experience, phenomenology, or something like that. And for me, it was, I feel support. I feel that I'm not alone. I'm just looking from different angle. So thank you, everybody, for this.
That's wonderful. You know that Jung, there's a talk in the 18th volume of his collected works where he's was asked to speak at the founding, I believe it is, of the Jung Institute in Zurich, the first Jung Institute. And he basically said, this is what I think depth psychology should be in the future. And then he just listed all of these categories of knowledge, all of these schools of thought, you know, anthropology, mythology, literature, the arts, the sciences, physics, all of these things. And he said it's important that the people who do these practices, that engage in this type of psychology, are at least conversant in as many of these as they can be, because we are multifarious, and the human mind and soul can just moves in every direction at once. It's limitless in a way, and we'll just keep expanding our knowledge. So in order to keep up with it, the intricacies of it, the extraordinary complexity of it, understanding it from all of these different angles, and for those who were here yesterday as well, I mean, it's just such a remarkable experience to be in this program, to be part of this program. And I came in 2006, and I haven't been able to get out because every day I'm reminded of that every single person that comes into the program is a miracle. And as that unfolds within the program, we influence one another. We show one another our own particular way of approaching the larger subject of what is East-West psychology, what is the interval. I'm wondering if Cindy or Alicia or is Margin here? Okay, Margin, if you'd like to say anything, not specifically about Alex's presentation, but about maybe what we're talking about right now, if it makes sense to you.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And I appreciate Alexander just speaking to that connection between all of our presentations. You know, it shows, one, I'm sort of impressed with your ability to be present to all those presentations, knowing the technology issues you were also dealing with, Alexander. It's very wise that you were able to kind of identify that and tap into the interconnectedness of the ways of the things that we're talking about, and to recognize that that's not by accident, right? That happens because we have all chosen to be in this particular space and have some shared value systems.
And in some way, for me, it's connected with first presentation about synchronicity. That it comes.
I'll just, it's everywhere all the time. It's so wonderful to see it. Thank you so much to everyone who presented. I'm thinking, Alexander, of one phrase, I don't remember what slide it was on, but it spoke about spontaneous knowledge, and how often that occurs as images, and that resonated for me in my experiences with synchronicity, that knowledge can arrive immediately, acausally, and it's often embodied and often from the non-rational world, so archetypal or imagerial. So that's where I felt a link to in our work, and I'm really grateful for that. I think bringing that spiritual element into embodiment is really important. I'm so excited by all the work going on and all the connections. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? I think that I'd just like to say that I was noticing in the classes that I was teaching this semester that, you know, I do presentations at many classes. We have presentations at the end of the semester, how just randomly choosing students, students saying, you know, I want to present on this day, I want to present on this day, how the subject matter all tended to hang together. Now, in part, it's hanging together because the class is on a specific subject. But it was also remarkable that people would talk about very specific things. It would just show up in the class space on that day. And this is an experience that I've had many, many times here in East West. And I don't know, I mean, as I'm getting older, and I think, Cindy, this has something to do with your talk. As I'm getting older, I find that I'm actually living more in that space where synchronicities are more evident to me not through my own doing. It has very little to do with any effort that I've placed into it. I think that it just has to come with aging. I mean, if I'm doing anything, I'm paying more attention, and I'm paying more attention because I'm in this wondrous alembic that we have here, East-West psychology. So every day I'm reapproaching these ideas. So maybe if I did anything that was smart, it was in, you know, coming here and sticking around so that this stuff could rub off on me. But I'm noticing this, and I was thinking actually while you were talking of the last paragraph in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where Jung says, you know, when Lao Tzu says, all are clear, I alone am clouded, he's expressing what I now feel in advanced old age. Lao Tzu is the example of a man with superior insight who has seen and experienced worth and worthlessness, and who at the end of his life desires to return to his own being, into the eternal, unknowable meaning. And at 66, I can say I'm feeling that pull in me. It's not that strong enough. I can feel it. The archetype of the old man who has seen enough is eternally true. At every level of intelligence, this type appears, and its lineaments are always the same, whether it be an old peasant or a great philosopher like Lao Tzu. This is old age and a limitation. A limitation. I mean, I can feel it in my body very clearly. Yet there's so much that fills me: plants, animals, clouds, day and night, and the eternal in man. The more uncertain I have felt about myself, the more there has grown up in me a feeling of kinship with all things. In fact, it seems to me as if that alienation, which so long separated me from the world, has become transferred into my own inner world and has revealed to me an unexpected unfamiliarity with myself. As he's attenuating out into the world, as his body is beginning to dissolve and break down into the elements, there's an unexpected unfamiliarity with his self, which I just think is so beautiful. With Jung, you're always in the field of opposites, even up till the end. Somehow this statement also kind of hangs together with what everybody has talked about today. There's a little piece of it, of each of the talks in here for me. Anyway, is there anything that anyone would like to share before we close? Hi, Kathy.
I just want to acknowledge the incredible movements happening in the skies with Venus and Moon and all kinds of astrological shifts. I know that many of us will, share some appreciation for those things that are taking place. And I think it's quite profound that this student symposium happened yesterday and today. Very, very inspiring. And the Divine Mother is very happy, is what I'm feeling. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Jonathan.
Yeah, I could definitely jump in and just share gratitude to everybody over the last couple of days. Every year it never ceases to amaze me of the like you had already mentioned, Stefan, but just the richness and the beauty and the depth that everybody brings themselves into this department. And I think that there's a lot that we share about what we're looking for in academics. And I think that just that kind of to use what Mia's term yesterday, the polyphony of different voices of like really holding the complexity of this discourse community. And while acknowledging there's certain things that we would be looking towards, like yesterday, there was a very strong Debashish kind of tied it all together very beautifully at the end. But there's a kind of world that we are looking towards that doesn't serve us, and everybody has their own unique perspective on that and their own unique embodied experience of that. And that's something that is shared, but in polyphony and difference. And I think that's really, really beautiful. It is this kind of these presentations all, if they were to make a kind of a music, it would be one like one of polyphony, and yet it would still be felt as whole. That's the kind of musical discovery that my dissertation is being exploring in terms of cultural polyphony, for instance. And I've explored that in using a cultural framework, which goes into cross-cultural, transcultural, heterocultural, is different cultural frameworks of thinking about how we are able to hold difference. But I think that what this community is always, it never ceases to amaze me at how there's really a sense of something that's whole that doesn't need to be uniform or articulated as one thing or enclosed within one concept or whatnot. Because then it risks becoming closed off, and that's really the complexity of, I think, trying to build a discourse community like this, which is not easy. We've had Stefan and I have we've had the podcast going. We've had scholars on who are involved in this kind of research that aren't from our department or school, but the danger is that it's not accepted on the mainstream. How do we maintain relevance in the mainstream academics, which maybe not be everybody's main intention. Sometimes I struggle with that myself, in my musical life and in my academic life. But there's been people that have been saying it's really like, how do we bring that academic integrity and that the rigor of what academics involves to our work, and really make it stand so that anybody can engage with it as being quite rigorous and valid, and in terms of the academic pursuit. And I think that I just love this community in that way. And it looks different. It's hard, and it takes, I think there's a kind of a fearlessness that is also there. I've gone through a lot of reflecting on this in myself, because I wrote a dissertation which I really put myself into the middle of, and it doesn't look like any one thing. It doesn't look like a musicology paper. It doesn't look like a philosophy paper. It doesn't look, but what does it look like? Well, it looks like me too, and I think that the kinds of rigor that I've tried to bring in are not always recognizable to, they might be recognizable to some people, but not others. And so it's not about appeasing everybody, but it's really, I think, um, it's, I think, about just being on that edge. And so saying, yes, we need to renew our relevance to mainstream interests. Otherwise, nobody will ever take notice. And like, part of the political orientation of this school from the beginning has been to be on the periphery. The periphery is kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Try to dig into where you need to push up against things, use those lenses, use those analytics that can help you create the image of the thing that you need to fight against as a scholar activist, but also make sure that we always have that 1 foot out, so that we can go to our places of power and knowledge that might not be acknowledged within the mainstream either. And I think that this is something that I see, it seems like we are sharing this and doing it very beautifully with a lot of grace and depth and integrity. And I think that I'll just end by saying, the very beginning, experiential. Alicia, you said, think of ourselves as an integral part of a larger consciousness. And I mean, this is really I think that's what the school is founded on. Haridas Chaudhuri came here with, in a nutshell, probably that intention, and trying to see, okay, with that intention, where can we go? And how can we put that idea into as many different conversations as we can, and express it in different ways. And I think that, Stefan, bringing up the mind body problem is something I've had to grapple with in my dissertation as well. But I think, again, at the core of this school is not accepting that, even the mind body split, which most of our intellectual and cultural histories, as settled Western, like Europeans and North America, for instance, for me, but is based on these assumptions. And so that's where a lot of the times the work that happens, that doesn't accept that, can be considered, oh, you're crazy, you're not, this isn't acceptable. But it's really a matter of like, well, no, it is acceptable, and this is why, because of this is the work that we're doing here. And so in terms of the last thing, I'll just say, I love, Stefan, what you're talking about in terms of, what is it that you've done, to be more aware of synchronicities, and kind of saying, well, maybe I'm just bringing more attention, which is what you were asking to in your presentation, Alicia, as well. But if we are problematizing the mind body, if we're problematizing all of these different binaries that don't necessarily serve our lived and embodied experiences, normal or not normal, or I mean, culture is radically heterogeneous at its base, and I think that problematizing and really pushing through how we reduce things to these simpler, essentialist ideas is really important. But just bringing awareness to that heterogeneity, and in a sense, if we're pushing beyond, for instance, the body mind, is that if there is immanent spirituality and a transcendent spirituality, depending on what framework and what your experiences are, but it's really like kind of bringing an intention to our, like a spiritual ecology, there's something that is, we can attend to, we can participate in, that opens to those, that idea of like there's an infinite consciousness in which we are attending to, and that is a type of ecology. In a sense, it's not only a vital or a organic or a material one, but this is I guess one of the divides, a material and spiritual, that is a huge one, that when we bring our attention to it, there's many ways in which it doesn't hold up. So these are some of the themes that I just felt were coming out over the last 2 days. But thanks everybody so much for all of your beautiful work. And I'll pass it back to Stefan. Why don't you, unless somebody else has something to add, but close out, because we are over time a little bit.
Yeah. No, I just want to say that I'm preaching to the choir, but there are many things with the educational system, higher education, that I don't want to say that they're wrong, but they tend to make people think in lockstep with one another and not think outside the box. And that's what we attempt to do in the program, not purposefully to be transgressive, but to bring into the picture, bring into the frame more of what we consider the human being to be, whether we call that spirituality, psychospirituality. I mean, there are many different ways that we can look at it. But I think that everybody here is just doing that wonderfully. So we need to learn the canon of whatever it is, whatever discipline we're studying, whatever area of research we're involved in. And we need to understand how we can creatively transgress or transcend the given parameters of those disciplines if they're restricting and seem to be tending towards dogmatism, like you can do this, you can't do that. So I think that that's the challenge that we're facing. And I don't know, I'm just, the last 2 days, I've just seen, it's remarkable that everybody's living that ideal and doing it in really wonderful fashion. I mean, extraordinary work. I'm seeing this in my classes as well. Somebody was saying to me the other day that the crop of students that we have in the program now is the finest that they've seen in years. And I thought, well, okay, that's maybe a little hyperbolic, but maybe not. I'm really, really impressed with the work that I'm seeing. People who are light years beyond me when I was at and where you are. And I know that the program under Debashish has really been working very hard to give you all the tools that you need to shine and be excellent. So maybe that's paying off also. All right. Anyway, it's time to go. My partner is actually standing outside the front door and it's locked, and I have to go down and let her in. So,
Okay.
oh, it's a good time to
Thanks,
good time
everybody.
to end.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers.
And Jonathan, could you wait for just a minute? I'm going to go down and get her shit. Be right back.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. She started knocking while you were talking, and I was like, "Oh God, what am I going to do?"
Oh my gosh.
I could have run down. I think that there was enough time, but I was a little bit concerned.
Oh
So
yeah.
anyway,
No
yeah,
worries.
it was amazing. These presentations are great. These students are amazing
Great.
to me.
Great. Yeah.
I'm so impressed.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much for holding that space. And yeah, I'll edit this up so it'll be smooth, but it was a little bit, we managed to push through with Alex's tech problems, but that was actually, I didn't actually realize that sh screen sharing takes up a lot of bandwidth. So that's something important to learn. I've heard about this, people doing that. I've never experienced it, but it worked. So I'm really happy.
It worked, yeah. And yeah, and I was really scattered at the beginning for a number of reasons, but I had cleaners in the house. So the energy was just swirling around me. And I thought at first, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'll just let people speak. And I didn't state it. I didn't own it. I just said, I'll just let people talk and then I'll speak later. And then I realized, no, I'm going to forget what I have to say. And that's
Yeah.
why I immediately jumped in and said, no, I think I'll talk. So the whole thing was a little bit chaotic at the beginning, but it settled in nicely. And Alex's talk was wonderful.
Yeah. Today they were short. I mean, there's a couple that were a little bit under. Alex's was quite short, but it's nice to be concise and it's good. But it all worked out. I mean, 2 hours yesterday. I mean, yesterday we went over by a bit. We were trying to squeeze 5 in, and you just lose, 3-4 minutes here and there. And then when Debashish wanted to do the question after each, then that adds another 5 minutes. And so, but I think going forward, I would still say like 2.5 hours for 4 would probably be good. Like almost what we did today. So
yeah, maybe give that extra half-hour buffer just in case, because all kinds of things come up, and you want people to be able to ask questions. Although today people were kind of quiet. You got one or two questions.
We're quiet. Yeah.
Anyway, you're still recording. I'm seeing.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'll edit it. Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And I appreciate Alexander just speaking to that connection between all of our presentations. It shows, one, I'm sort of impressed with your ability to be present to all those presentations, knowing the technology issues you were also dealing with, Alexander. It's very wise that you were able to kind of identify that and tap into the interconnectedness of the ways, of the things that we're talking about, and to recognize that that's not by accident, right? That happens because we have all chosen to be in this particular space and have some shared value systems.
And in some way, for me, it's connected with first presentation about synchronicity. That it comes.
I'll just, it's everywhere all the time. It's so wonderful to see it. Thank you so much to everyone who presented. I'm thinking, Alexander, of one phrase, I don't remember what slide it was on, but it spoke about spontaneous knowledge, and how often that occurs as images, and that resonated for me in my experiences with synchronicity, that knowledge can arrive immediately, acausally, and it's often embodied and often from the non-rational world, so archetypal or imagerial. So that's where I felt a link to in our work, and I'm really grateful for that. I think bringing that spiritual element into embodiment is really important. I'm so excited by all the work going on and all the connections. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? I think that I'd just like to say that I was noticing in the classes that I was teaching this semester that, you know, I do presentations many classes, we have presentations at the end of the semester, how just randomly choosing students, students saying, you know, I want to present on this day, I want to present on this day, how the subject matter all tended to hang together. Now, in part, it's hanging together because the class is on a specific subject. But it was also remarkable that people would talk about very specific things. It would just show up in the class space on that day. And this is an experience that I've had many, many times here in East West. And I don't know, I mean, as I'm getting older, and I think, Cindy, this has something to do with your talk. As I'm getting older, I find that I'm actually living more in that space where synchronicities are more evident to me not through my own doing. It has very little to do with any effort that I've placed into it. I think that it just has to come with aging. I mean, if I'm doing anything, I'm paying more attention, and I'm paying more attention because I'm in this wondrous alembic that we have here, East-West psychology. So every day I'm reapproaching these ideas. So maybe if I did anything that was smart, it was in, you know, coming here and sticking around so that this stuff could rub off on me. But I'm noticing this, and I was thinking actually while you were talking of the last paragraph in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where Jung says, you know, when Lao Tzu says, all are clear, I alone am clouded, he's expressing what I now feel in advanced old age. Lao Tzu is the example of a man with superior insight who has seen and experienced worth and worthlessness, and who at the end of his life desires to return to his own being, into the eternal unknowable meaning. And at 66, I can say I'm feeling that pull in me. It's not that strong enough. I can feel it. The archetype of the old man who has seen enough is eternally true. At every level of intelligence, this type appears, and its lineaments are always the same, whether it be an old peasant or a great philosopher like Lao Tzu. This is old age and a limitation. A limitation. I mean, I can feel it in my body very clearly. Yet there's so much that fills me: plants, animals, clouds, day and night, and the eternal in man. The more uncertain I have felt about myself, the more there has grown up in me a feeling of kinship with all things. In fact, it seems to me as if that alienation, which so long separated me from the world, has become transferred into my own inner world and has revealed to me an unexpected unfamiliarity with myself. As he's attenuating out into the world, as his body is beginning to dissolve and break down into the elements, there's an unexpected unfamiliarity with his self, which I just think is so beautiful. With Jung, you're always in the field of opposites, even up till the end. Somehow this statement also kind of hangs together with what everybody has talked about today. There's a little piece of it, of each of the talks in here for me. Anyway, is there anything that anyone would like to share before we close? Hi, Kathy.
I just want to acknowledge the incredible movements happening in the skies with Venus and Moon and all kinds of astrological shifts. I know that many of us will, share some appreciation for those things that are taking place. And I think it's quite profound that this student symposium happened yesterday and today. Very, very inspiring. And the Divine Mother is very happy, is what I'm feeling. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Jonathan.
Yeah, I could definitely jump in and just share gratitude to everybody over the last couple days. Every year it never ceases to amaze me of the like you had already mentioned, Stefan, but just the richness and the beauty and the depth that everybody brings themselves into this department. And I think that there's a lot that we share about what we're looking for in academics. And I think that just that kind of to use what Mia's term yesterday, the polyphony of different voices of like really holding the complexity of this discourse community. And while acknowledging there's certain things that we would be looking towards, like yesterday, there was a very strong Debashish kind of tied it all together very beautifully at the end. But there's a kind of world that we are looking towards that doesn't serve us, and everybody has their own unique perspective on that and their own unique embodied experience of that. And that's something that is shared, but in polyphony and difference. And I think that's really, really beautiful. It is this kind of these presentations all, if they were to make a kind of a music, it would be one like one of polyphony, and yet it would still be felt as whole. That's the kind of musical discovery that my dissertation is being exploring in terms of cultural polyphony, for instance. And I've explored that in using a cultural framework, which goes into cross-cultural, transcultural, heterocultural is different cultural frameworks of thinking about how we are able to hold difference. But I think that what this community is always, it never ceases to amaze me at how there's really a sense of something that's whole that doesn't need to be uniform or articulated as one thing or enclosed within one concept or whatnot. Because then it risks becoming closed off, and that's really the complexity of, I think, trying to build a discourse community like this, which is not easy. We've had Stefan and I have we've had the podcast going. We've had scholars on who are involved in this kind of research that aren't from our department or school, but the danger is that it's not accepted on the mainstream. How do we maintain relevance in the mainstream academics, which maybe not be everybody's main intention. Sometimes I struggle with that myself, in my musical life and in my academic life. But there's been people that have been saying it's really like, how do we bring that academic integrity and that the rigor of what academics involves to our work and really make it stand so that anybody can engage with it as being quite rigorous and valid and in terms of the academic pursuit. And I think that I just love this community in that way. And it looks different. It's hard, and it takes, I think there's a kind of a fearlessness that is also there. I've gone through a lot of reflecting on this in myself because I wrote a dissertation which I really put myself into the middle of, and it doesn't look like any one thing. It doesn't look like a musicology paper. It doesn't look like a philosophy paper. It doesn't look, but what does it look like? Well, it looks like me too, you know. And I think that the kinds of rigor that I've tried to bring in are not always recognizable to, they might be recognizable to some people, but not others. And so it's not about appeasing everybody, but it's really, I think, um, it's it's I think about just being on that edge. And so saying, yes, we need to renew our relevance to mainstream interests. Otherwise, nobody will ever take notice. And like part of the political orientation of this school from the beginning has been to be on the periphery. The periphery is kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Try to dig into where you need to push up against things, use those lenses, use those analytics that can help you create the image of the thing that you need to fight against as a scholar activist, but also make sure that we always have that 1 foot out so that we can go to our places of power and knowledge that might not be acknowledged within the mainstream either. And I think that this is something that I see, it seems like we are sharing this and doing it very beautifully with a lot of grace and depth and integrity. And I think that I'll just end by saying, you know, the very beginning, um, experiential. Alicia, you said, you know, think of ourselves as an integral part of a larger consciousness. And I mean, this is really I think that's what the school is founded on. You know, Haridas Chaudhuri came here with, you know, in a nutshell, probably that intention and trying to see, okay, with that intention, where can we go? You know, and how can we put that idea into as many different conversations as we can and express it in different ways. And I think that, you know, Stefan, you know, bringing up the mind body problem is something I've had to grapple with in my dissertation as well. But I think again at the core of this school is not accepting that even the mind body split, which most of our intellectual and cultural histories as, you know, settled Western, like Europeans and North America, for instance, for me, but is based on these assumptions. And so that's where a lot of the times the work that happens that doesn't accept that can be considered, oh, you're crazy. You're not, this isn't acceptable. But it's really a matter of like, well, no, it is acceptable. And this is why, because of this is the work that we're doing here. And so in terms of the last thing, I'll just say I love the stuff on what you're talking about in terms of, you know, what is it that you've done, you know, to be more aware of synchronicities and kind of saying, well, maybe I'm just bringing more attention, which is what you were asking too in your presentation, Alicia, as well. But if we are problematizing the mind body, if we're problematizing all of these different binaries that don't necessarily serve our lived and embodied experiences, you know, normal or not normal, or I mean, culture is radically heterogeneous at its base, and I think that problematizing and really pushing through how we reduce things to these simpler, you know, essentialist ideas is really important. But just bringing awareness to that heterogeneity, and in a sense, if we're pushing beyond, for instance, the body mind, is that if there is immanent spirituality and a transcendent spirituality, depending on, you know, what framework and what your experiences are, but it's really like kind of bringing an attention to our like a, you know, a spiritual ecology, a spiritual, there's something that is we can attend to, we can participate in, that opens to those, you know, that idea of like there's an infinite consciousness in which we are attending to, and that is a type of ecology in a sense. It's not only a vital or a organic or a material one, but this is I guess one of the divides, a material and spiritual, that is a huge one that, you know, when we bring our attention to it, there's many ways in which it doesn't hold up. So these are some of the themes that I just felt were coming out over the last 2 days, but thanks everybody so much for all of your beautiful work. And I'll pass it back to Stefan. Why don't you, unless somebody else has something to add, but close out because we are over time a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to say that you know, I'm preaching to the choir, but there are many things with the educational system, higher education, that I don't want to say that they're wrong, but they tend to make people think in lockstep with one another and not think outside the box. And that's what we attempt to do in the program, not purposefully to be transgressive, but to bring into the picture, bring into the frame more of what we consider the human being to be, whether we call that spirituality, psychospirituality. I mean, there are many different ways that we can look at it. But I think that everybody here is just doing that wonderfully. So we need to learn the canon of whatever it is, whatever discipline we're studying, whatever area of research we're involved in. And we need to understand how we can creatively transgress or transcend the given parameters of those disciplines if they're restricting and seem to be tending towards dogmatism, like you can do this, you can't do that. So I think that that's the challenge that we're facing. And I don't know, I'm just, the last 2 days, I've just seen, it's remarkable that everybody's living that ideal and doing it in really wonderful fashion. I mean, extraordinary work. I'm seeing this in my classes as well. Somebody was saying to me the other day that the crop of students that we have in the program now is the finest that they've seen in years. And I thought, well, okay, that's maybe a little hyperbolic, but maybe not. I'm really, really impressed with the work that I'm seeing. People who are light years beyond me when I was and where you are. And I know that the program under Debashish has really been working very hard to give you all the tools that you need to shine and be excellent. So maybe that's paying off also. All right. Anyway, it's time to go. My partner is actually standing outside the front door and it's locked and I have to go down and let her in. So,
Okay.
hope it's a good time to
Thanks, everybody.
end.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers.